And the woman he'd tried to humiliate? She now had the keys to the entire building. Meanwhile, Malik stepped off the bus a few streets away, opened the note slowly with cold, damp fingers, and read the words that would change everything about his life. But that part of the story, that comes next. Malik stood under the shelter of a gas station awning, his fingers still clutched around the folded note. Rain poured around him, bouncing off the pavement in soft splashes, soaking the cuffs of his jeans. Cars passed, tires hissing on the wet road. He could feel the weight of the paper in his pocket like it was something more than just words. His heart thudded a little harder as he pulled it back out, carefully unfolding it. The ink was slightly smudged from where it had absorbed the moisture from his jacket. But the message was still clear. Written in hurried, slanted handwriting were only a few lines. You reminded me of someone I once loved. A kind soul. Go to the address below after 5 p.m. today. Ask for Helen. Don't tell anyone. Trust me. Below, the message was a street address written in the same quick handwriting. Malik stared at it, trying to figure out what he had just stepped into. He didn't know this woman. He hadn't even spoken more than 2 words to her. Yet the tone of the note wasn't random. It was personal, like it was meant only for him, like she knew something he didn't. He folded the paper again, slid it into the inner pocket of his jacket, and glanced up at the sky. The rain was letting up, but something in the air still felt heavy, like this day wasn't finished with him yet. Back at the courthouse, Chief Dana Walker had stepped away from the press crowd. She walked quietly through the private hallway leading to her new office. Well, the office that used to belong to Chief Donald Frey, a man who had retired just weeks earlier under a cloud of mystery. Whispers had swirled about his sudden departure, and no one had really known why. Some said it was health issues. Others hinted at pressure from above. But Dana knew the truth. She'd seen the files. She'd read the internal reports. She knew the pattern of misconduct that had gone ignored for years under that roof. She also knew about Rick Halden before today. His name had come up more than once in the complaints buried in a drawer nobody wanted to open. But today the drawer had been ripped open. Dana stood in the middle of her office, the city skyline stretching wide outside the window, and let out a long breath. She'd worked too hard to get here, too many years in the field, too many hours earning every inch of respect. But it wasn't the rank that mattered now. It was what came next. Because she wasn't here just to wear the badge. She was here to fix what had been broken for too long. But the moment she thought of that courtroom, of Rick's boot hitting her leg, of the silence that followed, of the fear in some people's eyes and the shame in others, something inside her tensed. It wasn't about her pride. It was about the system, one that had protected men like him, one that needed more than a new face at the top. Dana turned toward her desk. A folder sat there, thick, sealed, her name scribbled across the top. She hadn't opened it yet. It had been delivered an hour before the announcement, hand-delivered, by someone she didn't recognize. No return address, just her name and a red sticker on the corner that said, "Confidential. Read immediately." She hesitated, picked it up, and slowly began to peel it open. Across town, Malik walked past cracked sidewalks and rusted fences, gripping the damp paper with the address. He wasn't sure why he was even going. Maybe curiosity. Maybe because something about the note felt honest. Or maybe deep down he needed something to break the routine of his everyday life. School, work, coming home to a small apartment where his mother worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. Nothing ever really changed for people like him. He reached the end of the block and stopped in front of an old building. The address matched. It was a small, narrow house tucked between 2 abandoned storefronts. Its porch sagged slightly, the paint chipped and faded, but the light above the door was on, warm, inviting. He stepped up onto the porch, took a breath, and knocked. No answer at first. Then, slowly, the door creaked open. A white woman in her late 60s stood in the doorway, hair gray and swept back into a bun, her face lined with time, but her eyes were sharp, alert. "You must be Malik," she said softly, like she'd been expecting him all along. He nodded. "You're Helen?" "I am." She stepped aside. "Come in, we don't have much time." He paused for a second, then walked in. The living room smelled of old wood and lemon polish. Photographs lined the walls, black and white pictures of soldiers, women in nursing uniforms, children at birthday parties. But one frame caught Malik's eye. Faded photo of a young black man, probably around his age, standing in front of what looked like a police academy. "That was my son," Helen said quietly from behind him. "He would have been 40 this year." "What happened?" "Malik." She looked at the photo for a long second. He'd tried to make a difference. But the system, it pushed back. She turned toward him. "You look like him, same eyes." Malik didn't know what to say. He didn't know this woman, yet the emotion in her voice wasn't fake. She walked over to a cabinet, opened the drawer, and pulled out a sealed envelope. She handed it to him. "He left this behind," she said. "Said to give it to someone who showed the world kindness when no one else would." Malik looked down at it, heart pounding again. The envelope had no name on it, but it was heavy. Not just with paper, with meaning, with something bigger than could understand in that moment. "What's in it?" he asked. Helen shook her head. "That's not for me to know." Back at the courthouse, Dana stared at the file on her desk. It wasn't what she expected. It wasn't just Rick Halden's record. It was deeper. It was a map. Names, dates, internal memos. A web of officers, judges, and city officials tied together by a decade of quiet corruption. And at the center of it all, something even darker. One name was circled in red ink, Rick Halden, and beneath it, another one, Malik Washington. She froze. What did this kid have to do with any of it? It all started on a rainy Thursday morning. The sky was gray, the courthouse steps slick with water, and the mood inside that building was just as cold. People were filing into the courtroom slowly, some dragging tired feet, others hurrying with briefcases and folders pressed to their chests. Among them was a black woman, dressed in a simple black suit, hair pulled back, face calm but sharp, like someone used to watching, not talking. She walked like she knew where she was going, like she'd been here before, but not for the reasons anyone around her would assume. She didn't draw attention right away. She wasn't loud. She didn't carry herself like someone looking to make a scene. But the moment she walked through those courtroom doors, someone noticed. Officer Rick Halden, standing by the corner with his arms crossed and a smug look on his face, glanced up. He didn't know her. Not really. But in that moment, something about her presence rubbed him the wrong way. Maybe it was the calm in her step. Maybe it was the way she didn't flinch under the stares. Or maybe it was just the color of her skin. Rick wasn't just any officer. He had a reputation. In the precinct, people said he got the job done. But on the streets, folks whispered different stories. Stories about him pulling over black drivers for no reason, of muttering things under his breath in courtrooms, of treating people like problems, not like people. And now here he was, watching this black woman walk in, and something about her confidence rattled him. She didn't even look his way. She walked past him like he didn't exist, like he was just part of the furniture. And that didn't sit right with him. "Hey," he called out, his voice echoing a little in the room. "You lost?" She stopped, turned slightly, and looked at him. Calmly. No fear. No anger either. Just that same unreadable calm that seemed to annoy him more than anything. "No," she said simply. That answer. Too short. Too clean. It irritated him. He took a few steps closer, puffing up his chest, making sure everyone around could see who was in control. "This is a restricted area unless you're part of the case," he said, tilting his head. She raised. One brow glanced around at the dozens of civilians in the room, then back at him. "Then I suppose we're both in the wrong place." A few people nearby turned their heads, sensing tension. Rick's jaw tightened. He didn't like being talked to like that, especially not by someone he'd already decided didn't belong. Here. He stepped closer, close enough to invade her space. "I asked you a question," he said again, louder now. "Who are you, and why are you here?" She didn't flinch. "I'm exactly where I need to be. Now, if you'll excuse me." He didn't let her pass. Instead, he reached out and shoved her back with his hand. The room went quiet. And then, it happened. He kicked her. It wasn't hard enough to break bones. But it wasn't a mistake either. It was the kind of move someone makes when they think they have power, when they believe they can do whatever they want without consequence. People gasped. One woman covered her mouth. A man near the back muttered something under his breath. Phones started recording. The black woman stumbled slightly but didn't fall. She straightened herself, brushed the wrinkles from her jacket, and looked him dead in the eye. "You really shouldn't have done that," she said quietly. Rick laughed. "Or what? You gonna file a complaint? You think someone's gonna listen? To you?" He had no idea. No clue. Because just 10 minutes later, after the judge entered and the courtroom settled down, the mayor and 2 senior officers walked in through the side door, and they weren't here for the trial. They were here for the announcement. The mayor took the podium, adjusted the mic, and smiled at the crowded room. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Before we begin, we'd like to welcome someone very important to our city's law enforcement family. Please join me in welcoming our new police chief." The black woman rose from her seat, stepped forward, and turned to face the room. Chief Dana Walker. Rick's face turned ghost white. The color drained from him so fast it was like someone pulled the plug, mouth open, eyes wide, and body frozen in place. He watched as the woman he'd kicked in front of witnesses, and on camera, was introduced as the highest-ranking officer in the department. His new boss. The woman he'd have to answer to, and, as she turned her head slowly to meet his eyes, there was no smirk on her face, just that same calm expression. But now it held something more. Power. Authority, and the knowledge that justice didn't always come in the ways you expected, but it always came. Before anyone could speak, the bailiff's phone buzzed. A second later, so did Rick's, and everyone else's. One by one, heads turned toward the officer as his radio crackled with a new order. An immediate suspension, pending investigation, and while the room buzzed with confusion and whispers, something entirely different was happening halfway across town. A high school student named Malik sat on a crowded city bus. Rain tapped the windows, thunder rolled gently in the distance, and people shifted in their seats, trying to avoid eye contact or conversation. Malik was 17, tall, quiet, the kind of kid who kept to himself but always watched everything. Across from him sat a very pregnant white woman, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the pole to keep her balance. Nobody moved. Nobody offered her a seat, except Malik. Without a word, he stood, nodded toward the seat, and stepped aside. She looked surprised, grateful. "Thank you," she said, easing herself down. He gave a small smile, then returned to holding on to the raincoat still dripping from the downpour outside. The woman watched him for a moment, then reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She scribbled something, folded it twice, and gently tucked it into his jacket pocket as the bus slowed for the next stop. Malik looked at her, confused. She only smiled. "Open it when you're alone." And then, just like that, she was gone. The bus pulled away, the crowd unaware of what had just happened. But Malik stood there, holding that piece of paper in his hand, wondering what kind of note could feel so heavy. Back in the courthouse, Chief Dana Walker was being handed her official badge. The cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions, but her eyes, they weren't on them, they were still locked on Rick. And as the room erupted into motion around him, Rick Halden stood frozen in place, heart pounding, his world turning upside down. He didn't know yet what would happen next, whether he'd be fired, arrested, or worse. But one thing was clear, he had no power here anymore. She didn't recognize the name at first, but as she flipped through the file, she found something she hadn't expected. A sealed note, Same handwriting as the folder label. He's part of this. Protect him. He doesn't know what's coming. Dana leaned back in her chair, the file open before her like a puzzle she didn't know how to solve yet. The silence in her office stretched long. Somewhere, pieces were starting to move. Someone had planned this, and neither she nor Malik was at the center by accident. But why? And what were they about to uncover that could shake the department? The city? Maybe everything to its core? The rain had stopped, but the storm had just begun. Dana couldn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table with the confidential files still spread in front of her. Her coffee had gone cold, but she hadn't touched it in hours. The more she read, the more tangled the story became. Rick Halden wasn't just a rogue cop with a bad temper. He was part of something larger. Reports were buried, complaints edited or disappeared, internal affairs records altered. It was systemic, organized, and worse, protected by powerful people, judges, city attorneys, even retired officers who still pulled strings behind the scenes. But what rattled her most was Malik's name. His name kept popping up in different corners of the investigation notes, not as a suspect, not even as a witness, more like a thread. He was connected to a man named Jameson Wells, a retired officer who had vanished 10 years ago after blowing the whistle on department corruption. A man who, according to a photo buried at the bottom of the file, was Helen's son. Dana rubbed her temples, staring at the grainy photo of Jameson. Same eyes as Malik, same serious look. The resemblance was there, too strong to ignore. She knew what that meant. The kid who had simply offered his seat on a bus to a stranger was part of a legacy someone had tried to bury a decade ago. That someone had tried very hard to erase. Now the past was resurfacing, and people were about to get scared. Across town, Malik sat on the edge of his bed, the envelope Helen had given him still unopened in his lap. He could feel it pulling at him, like it was alive. His mother was asleep in the next room, and he didn't want to worry her. He'd almost told her what happened earlier that day, but something stopped him. Not fear, just a sense that he had to understand it first. He opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a journal, a worn leather-bound book filled with Jameson's handwriting. It didn't start like a diary. It started like a warning. If you're reading this, you're being watched. Malik blinked and kept reading. Page after page was filled with detailed notes, dates, names, badge numbers, accounts of racism, brutality, bribery, and threats. Jameson had documented everything: interviews with victims, letters from other officers, even handwritten transcripts of meetings he wasn't supposed to be in. But it wasn't just about corruption. It was about purpose. Jameson hadn't just been trying to expose something. He was trying to build something better. A secret movement. Small, quiet, but real. Officers, lawyers, and community leaders working together to reform the system from within. But something went wrong. Someone got to him. He went missing before the files could be released, before the truth could come out. At the end of the journal, one line was written in red ink: "Trust no badge unless you know the heart behind it." Malik sat back, breath caught in his throat. Everything in his life up until this day had been normal. School, friends, working weekends to help pay bills. And now he was holding the words of a man who might have been family. A man who had tried to change the system and disappeared for it. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. No message. Just a location pin. He stared at it for a long time, then turned off the screen and slid the phone under his pillow. He didn't know who was watching him, but someone was, and they wanted him to know it. At the station the next morning, Rick Halden sat alone in an empty interrogation room. The walls were gray, the table metal and cold. No cuffs, no guards, just him and a buzzing light overhead. He'd been called in for a meeting, told it was routine. But the moment he arrived, the tone changed. Dana had ordered internal review, and Rick could feel the walls closing in. He tapped his fingers on the table, glancing toward the two-way mirror. He could feel someone behind it, watching. Probably her. He clenched his jaw. He never thought he'd take orders from a woman like her, especially not after what happened in the courtroom. But now the power balance had shifted, and Rick didn't like being on the losing side. He leaned back in the chair and thought about the file he had destroyed 5 years ago, the one with Jameson Wells's name all over it. He remembered the call he got that night, the warning, "Take care of it quietly or we'll take care of you." He thought he had, until now. Now the kid with the journal had shown up and Dana had her hands on everything. Rick knew this wasn't about protecting his badge anymore. It was about survival. In the shadows of a small office building across the city, 2 men sat at a table, suits, tired eyes. One of them clicked through security footage of the courthouse. "There," the younger man said. "That's him, the boy from the courtroom, the one who helped the pregnant woman." The older man nodded. "That's Malik Washington." He flipped a folder open on the table. 17, no record, honor student, works part-time, lives with his mother. But guess who raised him when she was working night shifts? The younger man leaned forward. "Helen Wells." Bingo. The older man closed the folder and looked at the screen again. "The grandson of Jameson Wells just walked back into our mess. And if that journal ever gets out, we're done." The younger man hesitated. "What do we do?" "We watch, we wait. And if the kid starts getting too close to something, we handle it." "Handle it how?" The older man didn't answer. He just looked at the screen. His silence said more than words could. That evening, Malik stepped out into the cool air, journal hidden in his backpack. He walked past the corner where he'd first met the woman on the bus. The memory played back in his mind. How something so simple had led to all of this. He didn't notice the black car slowly trailing him down the block. He didn't see the figure behind the tinted window. But Dana did. She watched from her own car across the street, engine running. Her instincts told her the kid was in danger, and she wasn't about to let history repeat itself. Not on her watch. Not again.